Welcome to part 4 of Securing the Republic. Now we're going to begin discussing the War of 1812. This is part 1. Now, Madison had initially adopted the same policies of Jefferson, the use of embargoes to try and end impressment. But by 1811, impressment was the primary issue in American politics, right? And Madison began to drift more and more towards a more militant portion of the Republican Party, calling themselves the Warhawks. The Warhawks were led by the new Speaker of the House, a man named Henry Clay. We're going to talk about him several times during this course. In November of 1811, Madison is going to approach Congress and ask for an increase in the size of the United States Army, a military buildup. He's going to ask for 10,000 new recruits to be recruited into the U.S. Army. Ultimately, Congress is going to give him 25,000, right? At the same time this was going on in November of 1811, he's also going to begin directing his attention towards what he felt was the first point that they needed to attack in order to address the issue of British interference with Americans and American politics. And that had to do with the Indians in the Midwest, right? Now, he referred to them as the Wabash Indians. Now, what he's actually talking about is a whole conglomeration of Great Lakes Indian nations, including the Shawnee Indians, who were led by a chief named Tecumseh. Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, who was also referred to as the Prophet, right, were getting the Native Americans in the Great Lake regions, the different nations, to band together and, with the help of the British, oppose that continual expansion of Americans into the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan. Tecumseh and his confederation had been resisting American movement into the Ohio River Valley for quite some time. In fact, Tecumseh had actually approached the British in 1808, right? The British had been arming and giving weapons to these different Native American nations in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois territories, and Michigan territory as well, right, to help resist American movement in that region, okay? In 1810, Tecumseh is even going to meet with the Indiana governor, General William Henry Harrison, and warn him and say, look, if you continue moving onto our lands, there is going to be violence, okay? And there will be. At the same time, in November of 1811, when Madison was asking for a military buildup, Tecumseh's nation is going to attack the Indiana militia led by General William Henry Harrison. Tecumseh himself is not there, right? Tecumseh is actually down in Alabama at the time. He was negotiating with the Creek Indians around Red Stick Creek to try and get them to begin to rise up and resist movement in the South, right? So it was the brother, the Prophet, who's going to attack the Indiana forces there near Prophetstown on the Tippecanoe River, right? The attack, though, is going to be a disaster. William Henry Harrison is going to very easily defeat the Shawnee forces there facing him at the Tippecanoe River. As a matter of fact, he's going to get a nickname as a result of that. William Henry Harrison, from this point forward, will be known as Old Tippecanoe. Later, when he runs for president, that'll be used as one of the campaign slogans. Right? So the Warhawks begin to clamor more and more about some kind of action against Great Britain. Now, a naval operation is pretty much impossible, so what they're going to suggest is an invasion of Canada. If you target Canada and you capture it, you can use it as a bargaining chip. We'll give you Canada back in exchange for the end of the impressment of American sailors. Now, in spring of 1812, James Madison is going to get a new embargo passed against Great Britain, but the war drums are really being beaten, right? And on June 18, 1812, Congress will finally approve a declaration of war against Great Britain. So the United States and Britain now are at war, and the United States will begin to implement its plan to invade and capture Canada. You can see from this map here how well this is ultimately going to go. Now, initially, the best way to attack, honestly, would be through the Hudson River Valley, but the New York militias, who are mostly Federalist and mostly against the war, are going to refuse to support any marching of troops through New York to get up to Montreal and then onward towards Quebec, which is the key to Canada, right? So the initial invasion is going to begin in Upper Canada around Detroit. Revolutionary War veteran and Michigan Governor William Hull is going to be tasked with leading the assault out of Detroit into Canada. You can see it doesn't go very far. He invades out of Canada, is very quickly surrounded by British troops with Indian allies, is forced back into Detroit, and on August 16, 1812, he is going to surrender Detroit. We're going to lose Detroit. We're going to be forced to take it back after the war. So Hull, as a result of this, is actually going to be court-martialed, and he's actually even going to be sentenced to death. However, because it doesn't look very good for a Revolutionary War veteran to be put to death, President Madison is going to commute his sentence to just retirement, right? This is just one of several disasters in the region, though. You had earlier on July 17th of 1812, you had the British capture of Fort Michilimackinac there in the upper panhandle there of Michigan. You had the fall of Fort Dearborn on August 15th, the day prior to the fall of Detroit. Fort Dearborn is modern-day Chicago, right? So there's a whole series of disasters. There will be other attempts to invade Canada as well from western New York. You're going to have several attempts. They're pretty much all going to be disasters there in the Niagara area. In one case, General Zebulon Pike is going to attempt to take Fort York, right, which is modern-day Toronto. And though he's going to be victorious on the battlefield, he's also going to be killed along with a lot of his men when the retreating British army, seeing that they couldn't withstand the assault, is going to set off their ammo dump. And many of the men are literally going to be killed from the overpressure from the explosion and along with the large pieces of debris. One report from a shipbound witness to this was that a large boulder dislodged from the explosion actually came down on top of General Zebulon Pike, crushing him, and suddenly turns the end of his life into a Wile E. Coyote skit, right? Of the battles here in this region, there's only going to be really a couple of significant successes by American forces, right? You're going to have the Battle of the Thames in August of 1813. It's going to be in this battle that they will finally capture and kill Tecumseh. And then Oliver Hazard Perry is going to conduct a naval victory on Lake Erie that in the Battle of Lake Erie that's going to ultimately lead to the capture of Fort George, the only significant fortification in Canada that the United States is going to capture.